A few months ago, my colleague Mark Andrews brought you guys a review of the Innovate ME7. Now, during that review, he referred to the Innovate company as a C-list EV maker here in the Chinese market. Well, for today's video, moving up to B-list with this, the WM Motors W6. Let's have a look. Oh, what? Hello? Yes, we're inside the car. I know what you're thinking. Ethan, you're supposed to talk about the exterior styling first and then get inside the car. Well, for today's video, we're going to start with what I think is the most important and probably maybe the only highlight of this entire car, and that is its AVP system, that is autonomous valet parking. Now, this kind of system is available in other cars, but I believe that this is one of the most, if not the most advanced system that we've ever seen on the channel, and perhaps the most advanced system that's available for sale today. That's because this system can not only go to a designated parking spot, but can also come from a designated parking spot to a designated endpoint. Both of these we will show you, but first I'm going to explain a little bit about how it works. Basically, this system allows the car to study a specific path to a specific parking spot. The way we do that is we select the system here, the AVP system, and then we say add a route. We then choose, are we entering a parking space or leaving a parking space? We then, for this case, maybe we pick entering a parking space. We then hit the button here to set our starting point, at which point I can then travel up to 100 meters total to a parking space. And then the system takes a few minutes to kind of process everything that it's seen. And then after that, you can use the app on the phone, which I seem to have misplaced. I think it's here. Here it is. You can use the app on the phone. By holding down on the screen, you'll then be able to have the car either come to you or go to a specific parking place. We have played with it quite a bit, and it's actually pretty effective. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, we're outside of the car now, and we're going to use the app here to try and park it using the parking space that we have taught it how to use, the AVP system. So there's a button here on the screen. I have to hold down and keep pressed, and there we see the lights flashing. Here it comes. Now, I've used this system quite a few times over the last few days, and I will say that, generally speaking, it's quite effective. One thing that I have to point out is, at no point while using it have I ever felt like it was going to hit another vehicle or an object. Sometimes it gets a little bit stuck, but I've never felt like it was in danger of running into any obstacles. That is a big upgrade from the system, the last remote control system we showed you, which was the BYD Tong, a car that's a couple of years older. That car, much like some Audis and BMWs, had a remote control system to go forwards and backwards and turn just a little bit, but it did not have any kind of sensors to stop it from running into anything. This car definitely does. So now we see that it has reached what is supposed to be happening now is it's going to go to the left and then back into the space up here, but it seems to have gotten a little bit stuck. This does happen sometimes in my experience, but usually the system takes a few minutes, or a few seconds rather, to kind of read with surroundings, and then it goes for it again. Here we go. And there you have it. So the process for teaching the car how to leave a parking space and go to a specific location is the same, pretty much. Car, and then we choose leave parking space. We set our starting point as the parking space here, and then we set off. Now, much like the choosing a parking space to begin with, the going to the parking space function, you can only go up to 100 meters, and during the studying process and the car driving itself, it can only go 15 kilometers per hour, or somewhere around 10 miles per hour, 12 miles per hour. I can tell you in experience that that feels plenty fast when you're not behind the wheel. So if we just stop right here, perfect. We set this as our final location, give it a name, and then we just have to wait for the system to take a few minutes to process everything that it has seen. After that's done, we will get out of the car and we will see how it handles this particular route. So we've now parked the car and taught it a new route to get to a destination out of the parking space. Let's see how it handles it. Here we see it's driving out. Looking good so far. Now it is supposed to immediately take a left here and then park up there on the side of the road. While we're waiting for it to do its work, I have to talk a little bit about whether this feature is useful. In my honest opinion, I would say not really. It's not quite to the point where I would trust it to really park itself without me watching it the entire time. Not because I think that it will run into anything, but because it will simply take far too long. Take, for example, this. It's kind of stopped about 5 meters or about 20 feet, 25 feet short of where I wanted it to stop. But again, I do think this is an exciting development. This is the first time I've ever seen a car that has both the going to and leaving parking space features, the automatic valet. So it is an important step in the journey towards full autonomy, but do I think that most people who drive this car will actually use it? Absolutely not. AVP is a pretty impressive feature, but I think we should take a look at the rest of the car to see if there are any other highlights worth talking about, starting with the exterior styling. Here on the front end, well, I would describe the styling on the W6 to be the inoffensive side of handsome. What that means is it's not especially distinctive, but it's by no means ugly. I actually do like the headlight treatment here, as well as the connected LEDs here in the middle, but there's really nothing especially interesting about them if I'm being honest. Coming around to the side, that also remains true. We have some reasonably attractive 18-inch wheels. We have a nice blacked out roof, which is always a good look, but overall in terms of the shape, I would say it mostly blends into the traffic you see on the road. I would say the story improves a bit when we get around to the rear end of the vehicle. We have this, I think, very handsome looking taillight design, somewhat reminiscent of that of the Neo EC6 that we previously drove on the channel, but not in a copycat sort of way. Overall, pretty good looking. One thing I want to point out before we talk about rear cargo area is the name of this car. Not W6, because frankly that's not very interesting, but rather Weltmeister. This company's name, previously at least, was Weltmeister. Weltmeister sounds like one of those situations in which a Chinese company bought up an existing European brand, say German for example, and started selling cars underneath that name. Think of Borg Ward. Turns out that's not the case. As far as I can tell, Weltmeister is a completely made up name that they decided to go with some years ago. I don't really know why they did that, but it seems they realized their mistake and if very recently changed their name from Weltmeister to WM Motors, which is probably a much simpler and I think probably less offensive name. Let's open up the rear while we're at it to check out some space. Rear cargo space is actually looking pretty good. In terms of both depth and width, you can fit quite a bit of stuff in here. It also helps that this doesn't have one of those coupe-style roof lines, so you don't have to worry about it impinging on cargo space. Here on the interior, the good-looking side of inoffensive is kind of the continued theme, I would say. There are some nice-looking materials, for example, this kind of straight aluminum-looking stuff here, some carbon fiber-esque things, but some of the material qualities are not exactly up to my standards, I would say, especially considering the price range. This, for example, feels very, very cheap, as does the leather material here in the armrests as well as the seats. Nothing especially uncomfortable, but nothing that's really very mind-blowing. I have a very high expectation for cars, especially EVs here in the Chinese market. Their biggest asset is their value. They pack so many features into such a low price that I have a really high standard for that. This car, unfortunately, in some cases, not really meeting that. In terms of screens, we have 3. I do appreciate, for example, much like the Li 1 that we previously reviewed on the channel, the climate controls are housed in a separate small screen down here, making them a little bit easier to operate. One thing, just as an example of a feature that I would expect in a car at this price point that it doesn't have, no cooled seats. It's a small thing, but again, maybe I'm just jaded by a lot of the other cars that we drive. Overall, styling, looking very good, but in terms of the substance of it, I'm not overly impressed. 2 other features that feels worth mentioning before we move to the back seat are the very effective voice controls here in the car, as well as the different kinds of interior modes you can have. I'm going to illustrate both of them now by activating the stargazing mode.
请说。
打开看星星模式。 There we go. This is the stargazing mode. There are a variety of modes available. When you set up the modes, you can set a specific time for each of them, say 1 minute or 5 minutes. So maybe you use the sleeping mode, you set it for 15 minutes, and then you take a nice nap. Here in the rear seat, we have what is a surprising amount of rear headroom, another benefit of not having one of those coupe-style roof lines. There's also a good amount of legroom as well. I would say a very impressive amount of legroom. There are, however, some features that I wish it did have that it does not. For example, there are no controls for HVAC here in the rear. There's also, so far as I can tell, only one USB outlet down here on the bottom. I'm starting to get the feeling that they spent all of their money on the autonomous driving and autonomous parking features and didn't worry so much about the rest of the car. Before I talk about what it's like to drive this car, I'm going to give you a bit of an info dump, all of the data. Up front is a single electric motor making 160 kilowatts and 225 newton meters of torque. That's equal to about 215 horsepower and around 175 pound-feet. The official 0 to 100 kilometer per hour time is 7.9 seconds. Powering all of that is a 83 kilowatt hour battery pack, which gives it an NEDC range of 520 kilometers. So what does it feel like to actually drive this car? Well, as the numbers would suggest, it's not particularly quick, but that's fine. Not every electric car has to have a 0 to 100 kilometer per hour time faster than you can say useless on the public roads. In terms of the driving feeling, well, there's not much to be found. There are different driving modes, of course, your sport and comfort and eco, which really only adjust the throttle response and the steering feel, much heavier in the sport mode in particular. At no point do you have a lot of communication through the steering wheel. However, that's not something you get, but that's also very common on cars in this class, so that's okay. Of course, in a car like this, something more important than the driving feel is probably going to be the comfort. In that respect, this car does pretty well. It's not especially more comfortable than other cars that I've driven in its class. In fact, I would say it's probably kind of right in the middle. It has a McPherson strut suspension up front and then torsion beam in the rear, nothing particularly advanced, and I would say that the ride reflects that. It does have an autonomous driving system, and I've used it a little bit, but really nothing to mention there. It's not particularly advanced as far as I can tell at this point, but I believe there's going to be some OTA upgrades in the future. Maybe we'll get a chance to drive it again then. Overall, though, much like the exterior styling, much like the interior styling, I would say there's really not a lot of highlights on this car. It just kind of is. So there you have it. The WM Motors W6 is by no means a bad car, but it is somewhat of a one-trick pony. All right, that's all for today's video. Be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram, links in the description. And as always, like, subscribe, and hit the bell.